They didn't wait for my permission. One moved behind me, his warm breath touching my shoulder as my robe shifted when his hand found my waist. The other stood directly in front, eyes meeting mine, silently challenging me to pull away or stay put. The washing room was barely lit by a single flickering light and the gentle hum of the dryer. I could smell fresh soap powder and his cologne. 4 hands met at my hips. I didn't push them away. I stayed silent. I let my back rest against the warm dryer. I let the tension grow between all 3 of us. I let them slowly take control carefully. Like they'd been thinking about this moment far longer than I had. And perhaps they really had. I convinced myself I'd forgotten what desire felt like. But honestly, I hadn't forgotten at all. I had buried it deep inside. I buried it every single time I folded his clothes. Every time we sat through another quiet dinner where nobody asked about my feelings. Every time I started another load of washing just. To avoid that cold, empty bedroom upstairs, this wasn't something I planned. I never daydreamed about 2 pairs of hands moving like they'd been patiently waiting backstage for years. But when they both reached toward me, I didn't pull back. I opened that door wide and refused to shut it. It didn't feel like breaking any rules. It felt like remembering something I'd left for dead inside my heart. I'm 38 years old. I've been someone's wife for 12 long years. I'm the woman who never forgets special dates, who knows exactly how he takes his morning coffee, who collects his pressed shirts without being asked. But nobody has truly looked at me in such a long time, not in any real way. The first man, Calb, happens to be my husband's cousin. A few years younger than me, divorced way too young, always treating me with that easy, almost invisible kindness. He's been visiting more often lately, helping fix things around our house, staying over when the weather gets bad. The second one, Jonah, is his closest friend from their college days. More rough around the edges, quieter than most, but with eyes that slice throughout any room like he's asking questions I'm too scared to answer. They both began showing up more frequently. At first, it seemed like pure chance. Then it became routine. Then it turned into something completely different. They never looked at me like I was slowly disappearing. That particular night, the storm knocked out all our electricity. My husband was away on another business trip that got delayed. I was folding clean towels beside the dryer when I heard knocking at the door, then more knocking. I wasn't expecting both of them together, but they arrived soaking wet, eyes tracing my robe like they'd never seen it before on my body. I can't recall who touched me first, only that I didn't stop either one of them. What would you do if the only people who made you feel alive were Theons you were never supposed to miss? The dryer stopped running. The room became silent except for my breathing and the soft sound of a zipper coming undone. I was shaking not from fear, but because I hadn't felt this kind of warmth in years, like I wasn't just a background piece in someone else's daily routine. This doesn't mean anything important, not really. That's what I whispered to myself as Jonah pressed his lips against my neck, and Calb loosened the belt of my robe like it was some holy ritual. They weren't in any hurry. They didn't compete with each other. They simply understood, and I allowed them to continue. I wanted it desperately. I didn't even question why. The sound of our front door unlocking cut through everything like a knife. I froze it completely. Jonah stepped back first. Calb moved away like he hadn't just had his hand inside my robe. We said absolutely nothing. If you've ever craved something knowing it would destroy you, but leaned in anyway, this story might hurt. To hear, please like and subscribe. We carry this pain together. The washing room light had flickered once before it died completely. I stood perfectly still in the darkness, heart pounding so loud I thought it might echo down our hallway. My husband didn't come inside right away. I could hear his car door slam, then the beep of him locking it, then his footsteps slower than normal dot by. The time he turned that doorknob, I'd already fixed my robe and pressed my back against the washer, pretending to search for something in the laundry basket. Jonah had disappeared down the hallway. Calb was pretending to check the electrical box, talking too loudly as if noise could erase what had just happened between us. My husband stepped inside, dripping wet from the rain. He kissed my cheek gently and asked why the power was out. I nodded, smiled, and said I had no idea. And just like that, everything went back to normal on the surface, at least. The following morning felt exactly like every other. Scrambled eggs, buttered toast, a load of bed sheets tumbling in the dryer. My husband left early for work, and I was alone in the kitchen pouring coffee I didn't really want. But I could still feel the ghost of their fingers on my skin. Not in a romantic way, not even in a guilty way. It felt like I'd finally woken up, like I'd been drowning for years and suddenly remembered how to breathe again. I knew it was completely wrong, but I stayed in that feeling anyway. It didn't start with physical touches. It began quietly and slowly. Jonah would stop by after his work, bringing over things my husband had forgotten. A winter jacket, a set of house keys, a box of screws for repairs. He'd hand it to me, stay a moment too long, and then walk away. Calb had his own pattern, fixing broken cabinet doors, trimming our hedges, always staying until the sun went down. I never invited them to stay longer, but he never told them to leave. Either they filled the empty space my husband didn't seem to notice anymore. I don't say that with anger, just simple truth. There's a special kind of loneliness that doesn't look like loneliness from the outside. I had food on our table, a nice house, a man who came home every night, but nobody had asked how I was feeling in months. Nobody had kissed me without it, leading to the same old routine in years. The first real change came during a Wednesday grocery trip. Calb offered to carry the heavy bags inside our house. Jonah followed along. I didn't ask either of them to come in, but they did anyway. I remember standing in our kitchen, the grocery bags still sitting on the counter, and Jonah staring out the window while Calb leaned against our refrigerator like it was the most natural thing in the world. We didn't talk much, but the silence felt thick, like something was pressing behind our ribcage. Jonah finally broke height. "You always do everything by yourself," he said, his voice low and concerned. I shrugged my shoulders. Not always, but most days, yeah. He didn't respond to that. Neither did Calb, but they didn't leave right away either. Over the next week, they kept showing up separately at first, then more often together. Always casual, always polite, always staying just a little too long. The strange part was it didn't feel threatening at all. It felt like being noticed, like I'd been invisible, and suddenly someone remembered I was still here. I didn't want to stop looking at them. I told myself it was nothing serious, just a little warmth during a cold stretch of me marriage. Just two men being kind to me, but I was watching them too. Their broad shoulders, their comfortable silence, the way Jonah would watch me stir a pot like it meant something special. The way Calb would lean a little closer every time he handed me a tool or passed by me at the kitchen sink. There were moments when I swear the air around us got thicker, like a second too long in the small pantry. A brush of hands when passing. The dinner plates. Once Jonah stood behind me while I reached for something on the top shelf. He didn't move away, didn't touch me. Just stood there close enough that my breath caught and I had to leave the room immediately. They never made the first move, but neither did I, and somehow that made it so much worse. It was a Thursday night when things shifted again completely. My husband was out of town again on business. Calb came over to help with a leaky kitchen pipe. Jonah tagged along without being invited. I made them both coffee. We ended up in the garage sitting on overturned storage crates, the sound of rain on the roof like drum beats. Nobody said much until Jonah looked up and said, "Do you ever feel like no one sees you anymore?" I stared at him in shock. I didn't answer out loud, but I think he already knew. Calb reached over and lightly touched my wrist. Just once, just stuck it too long. I didn't pull my hand away. That was the night I realized I wasn't the only one holding my breath around here. It wasn't worth the risk. I keep telling myself that. It's strange how quickly you start to notice the smallest things when you're starving for them. The way Jonah would clear his throat before speaking, like he was testing if it was safe to talk. The way Calb lingered in the doorway after finishing a task, pretending to wait for thanks hadn't need. The way both of them stopped using words as often, replacing conversation with glances that stuck to my skin like honey. It became a clear pattern. My husband would leave for meetings, for late shifts, for whatever excuse he mumbled, and not long after, one or both of them would show up. Never announced, never questioned, like they knew when I needed company more than I did myself. One afternoon, I opened the pantry door, and Jonah was there stocking the shelves from the grocery delivery I hadn't touched yet. He looked over his shoulder slow, like he'd been waiting for me to find him there. "You shouldn't be doing this alone," he said softly. He stepped aside but didn't leave the small space. I had to squeeze past him, and when I did, our shoulders touched. I didn't pull away, neither did he. I stood in that narrow space, his breath close to the back of my neck, and reached for a can I didn't actually need. He didn't speak again, but his hand rested against the shelf beside mine, and for a moment, the world narrowed into that sliver of warmth between our arms. I left the pantry with my heart racing and a soup can I didn't want. This doesn't mean anything important. Not really. It was slow, like fog creeping in under the door. By the time you notice it, you're real ready. Breathing it into your lungs. I told myself it was completely harmless. I wasn't doing anything wrong. Not yet, but I was changing quietly inside. I wore the softer robe instead of the old warm one. I waited by the window longer than necessary when I heard a car pull up outside. I stopped looking at my husband same way. Or maybe I stopped looking at all. One night, Calb stayed late after fixing the stair railing. My husband had called to say his flight was delayed again. I poured Calb a drink, just one glass, just enough. To relax, he sat on the living room floor back against the couch. I stayed in the armchair across from him, legs folded, pretending to scroll through my phone. You ever think, he said, eyes on the ceiling, that you might have disappeared without anyone noticing? I swallowed hard. Sometimes, it whispered, he nodded slowly. Me too, then complete silence. I felt nothing, and that scared me more than anything. The next day, Jonah showed up with groceries I hadn't asked for. He didn't ask permission to come in, just walked past me like he lived there. We puked everything away without speaking. Our arms brushed twice. I didn't flinch away. I felt the warmth, sharp, invasive, almost cruel, and I wanted more of it. In that middle of putting away the milk, he looked directly at me and said, "You're allowed to want things for yourself." Middle of putting away the milk, he looked directly at me and said, "You're allowed to want things for your at me and said, "You're allowed to want things for yourself." Hadn't smiled back. No, but some things. I didn't answer, but I didn't stop him when he stepped closer to me. His hand didn't touch mine, not that time, but it hovered inches away from mine on the countertop. We stood there not moving as the refrigerator hummed behind us and the groceries sat forgot on the kitchen floor. It was getting harder to breathe normally when they were near me. One of them always stood too close. The other always looked too long at me. He always stayed just a little too still like a deer caught in headlights. I didn't want to stop looking at them. Then came the storm warning on the local news. The weather station said it would hit by nightfall fast. Hard, unpredictable. My husband texted me from the airport. His flight was grounded again. Stay safe. I love you, he wrote. I stared at the screen too long before typing back, you too. An hour later, both Jonah and Calb were standing on my porch, soaking wet, carrying spare flashlights and a case of bottled water. Neither of them asked if they could stay the night. I stepped back and let them inside. And that was the beginning. Off night, I stopped pretending this wasn't happening. The power went out just after 9 o'clock. The wind had picked up dramatically, rattling our windows and making the trees outside creak like old bones. We lit a candle in the kitchen, then another in the hallway. Then we stopped lighting them altogether. The house was still and dim. Every shadow felt like a held breath. I sat on the floor by Thedrier, legs pulled in, rope cinched tight around my body. Calb was across from me, arms on his knees, watching the flicker of the candle on top of the washer. Jonah leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, staring at nothing in particular except me. No one spoke a single word. The silence wasn't awkward anymore, it was charged with electricity. A current too close to the surface. I should check the electrical breaker again, I said, just to say something. But I didn't move from my spot. Neither did they. Calb reached for the candle and held it in his palm like he was grounding himself with the warmth. Do you want us to leave? He asked. It was quiet but heavy with meaning. I looked at him then, at Jonah, and said nothing at all. That was the exact moment it tipped over the edge. They didn't get up right away. Didn't lunge forward or speak. Jonah moved first, just one step forward, then another. Calb rose slowly from the floor, setting the candle down beside me, his fingers brushing mine. Ash did. That small contact broke something deep inside me. I stood up and they both closed the space between us. Not aggressively, not possessively. Like they'd rehearsed this moment in their minds 1,000 different ways, but knew none of them would matter once I tactually began. Jonah stood in front of me, Calb behind. I could feel his chest at my back. Steady and quiet. Jonah's hands came to rest gently at my hips, his thumbs just barely brushing the fabric. My robe wasn't fully closed, it didn't need to be. My breathing changed before I could stop it. I knew exactly what I was doing, but I let it happened anyway. No one spoke a word. Jonah's hands slid up slowly, not searching, not taking, just learning the shape of me. My shoulders dropped, tension unraveling, and no long breath. I closed my eyes and gave in. Calb's fingers met the knot at me waist. He paused for permission. I didn't stop him. They didn't rush through anything. Jonah leaned forward and rested his forehead against mine. Not a kiss, just presents like he wanted me to feel him before anything else happened. Calb's hand tugged the robe open carefully. The fabric parted like curtains. My skin met the cold air. I should have felt shame, but instead I felt seen. Calb's hands curved along my waist, holding me like something fragile and chosen. They moved together, not in perfect sync, but in understanding. My back arched slightly against Calb, my breath hitched in Jonah's hands. Their touches weren't demanding or rough. They were patient, almost reverent, like I was something sacred. I told myself I was just lonely and desperate. But it wasn't just that simple. The air smelled like drier sheets and skin, like something domestic turned wild and free. And exploring. Cal pressed a kiss to the base of my neck, gentle like an apology. My knees gave a little. They caught me without hesitation. I let them hold me up. We stayed like that, wrapped together, pressed close. I turned slightly in Calb's arms, reaching for Jonah, who kissed me like he'd been holding that breath since the first time he saw me. Calb's hands didn't leave my waist. Jonah's mouth didn't leave mine. I just kept lying to myself about when it didn't last. It was about being chosen at the same time by two men who had quietly watched me fatting for years. And for once, I didn't have to reach for someone. They both reached for me. Afterward, we stayed there, tangled together, trembling, half-dressed in the dark laundry room while the storm raged outside our walls. No one spoke. Calb rested his head against my shoulder. Jonah ran a finger along my wrist in slow, silent strokes. And for a moment, just a moment, I didn't feel guilty about anything. I just felt real and alive. I stopped being just a wife for one night and started being a woman again. The sun filtered through a car engine started down the street. The ordinary world had resumed, clean and unaware, but I wasn't the same. The robe was gone, folded and hidden in the back of my dresser drawer. I'd showered twice, but their hands still felt like they lived on my skin. I wasn't supposed to feel that good. Not like that. Not with them both. I heard Jonah leave first, quite as a whisper, a soft sound of the side door clicking shut. Cal followed half an hour later. No words, just a soft nod when our eyes met in the hallway. Then I was completely alone when my husband came home that evening. He brought sandwiches and a new flashlight. He kissed my cheek, told me he missed me, asked if everything was okay during the storm. I said yes, of course. I smiled too big and bright. And then I went upstairs and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror until my face looked like a stranger's. I knew how to fake being okay. I'd been doing it for years and years. The silence between me and the men grew louder after that night. Jonah would pass by and ask if I needed anything, never looking directly in the eye. Calb would text before he showed up now, even if it was just to drop off a tool for my husband. And not yet. 3 days later, I found one of their jackets in the laundry room, still damp from that night. I held it to my face, inhaling deeply before I realized what I was doing, and dropped it like it had burned me. Pick up. The hardest part wasn't the memory of what happened. My husband never noticed the way I flinched when he touched my back in bed. He never asked why I'd started sleeping with my body turned away from his. He didn't seem to feel the difference, but I did. Everything I'd numbed over the years had returned with a vengeance. I started to notice just how quiet our home had become, how every word was functional, how every glance was filtered through the lens of duty and obligation, and I started to wonder if this was what. One night, I walked into the garage to look for something I didn't even remember what it was. And Calb was already there fixing a loose hinge on the storage cabinet. He looked up, startled to see me. So was I. We didn't speak at first. He stood wiping his hands on a towel and opened his mouth like he wanted to say something important, but he didn't. Then he left me standing there. The his feet. Next afternoon, Jonah brought over a box of tools, handed it to me, said, "Thanks for letting him store them." Then he walked away, and I was left holding the box, my arms suddenly too heavy for such a simple task. I kept telling myself it would fade with time, but some things. That weekend, my husband suggested we go out for dinner, something we hadn't done in months. I said yes. I put on a dress I hadn't worn in over a year. He complimented how I looked. I smiled back. We sat through dinner, made small talk, and pretended. I felt nothing, and that scared me more than anything else could. I had just come home from the grocery store, hands full off shopping bags, when I heard voices in the backyard, not raised, but too close at each other for comfort. I moved quietly through the hallway, stopping by the window near the back porch. There they were, Jonah and Caleb, standing side by side, heads tilted toward each other, like they were working something out in secret. Jonah was leaning just a little too close. I couldn't hear their words, but I didn't have to. There was a pause. Then Jonah looked up and caught my eyes through the window. He didn't flinch or look away. He just held my gaze for a moment too long, then turned back toward Caleb and nodded. I stepped away before they saw the heat rising to my face. Not from shame, from the unbearable clarity that whatever happened that stormy night hadn't ended at all. I thought I tucked it away safely, but it was still alive, still breathing between all three of us. Later that night after dinner, my husband came into the laundry room holding one of the jackets. "Did ya wash this already?" he asked, looking confused. I blinked, swallowed. "No, I didn't think so," I managed to say. He frowned. "Is it yours?" I asked. He shook his head. He shrugged, set it down, and walked out. Because I had buried my face in it, because I couldn't pretend anymore that this was something I had under control. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't mean for them to matter so much. But for a night I remembered how it feels to be touched, like I'm still here, still alive, still worth wanting. A week later, my husband asked me why I'd been so quiet lately. I said I was tired. He asked if I was okay. I said I didn't know, and he kissed the top of my head like that. Answered something important. Now, every time the doorbell rings, I feel it in my stomach. Not fear, no excitement, something perfectly in between, because I don't know what I'm hopping. That they've moved on and forgotten, or that they haven't. I didn't choose to fall for either of them. But the second I let go of shame, I pulled them both deep into my heart. And now I can't put any of it back where it was before. I won't tell you it was worth the risk. I won't even tell you I'd do it again if I could. But I will tell you this truth. When you go too long without being seen, sometimes the wrong hands feel like the only mirror you have left. And for one night, I didn't feel invisible anymore.